That's remote. Carla, are you there somewhere?
I'm here.
Marty?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Call the meeting to order. We'll start with some president's announcements. So welcome to our second live stream board meeting and happy Earth Day. Live streaming was a board objective designed to increase transparency and greater community participation even before COVID-19 popped up. Thankfully, we got it done just before the outbreak, and we're still struggling a little bit with the technology. As I told you the last time, we've initiated procedures to protect meeting attendees while we continue to do the business of the village. The boardroom was thoroughly sanitized before the meeting. 4 board members are attending remotely, so we can manage to keep those in the room at a maximum of 10. We are socially distancing, as you can see if you're watching, and we're maintaining at least a 6-foot space between all participants. Presenters will be called into the meeting one at a time. The next presenter will not be summoned until after the previous presenter has left. The presenter's table and microphone will be disinfected after each presentation. This meeting is also being recorded for later airing on the POA website's board page. So with that, I'll open the meeting by calling for a motion to approve the minutes from the April 8th meeting.
Motion to approve.
Pat White has made the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Bruce seconded. Are there any changes to the minutes? No changes being mentioned. All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, it's 7-0. The next meeting, next agenda item is the COVID-19 update. And just so everybody's aware of what's going on, yesterday, the reported cases in Loudoun County were 23. 17 of those are judged recovered, and there has been no deaths in the county. In Monroe County, there have been 11 cases, 7 of which are judged to be recovered, and there has been a death in Monroe County. There's 7,394 cases in Tennessee, which is up 2.2% from the day previous. But that brings us to 18 consecutive days with only single-digit increases here in the state. There are 157 deaths in Tennessee. And I would note that almost 83% of those are in the age 61 and over bracket. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Winston Blazer so he can give you a current status on what the village is up to.
Thank you, Mr. President. Start off on my COVID-19 report. Administrative offices are still closed to walk-in traffic. All the staff members are there reporting for work and answering phones and performing their administrative functions. If you have a need for administrative services, please give us a call and we can help you over the phone and take care of whatever questions or business you may have. The Welcome Center is my next area to report on. The Welcome Center lobby is still closed to walk-in traffic and visitors, but the staff is inside working. There's generally at least 2 to 3 people in the office working at all times. Once again, if you have questions regarding tours and general information about the village, please call the Welcome Center. They do have staff there to help you with those inquiries. Golf is in a modified operating mode. This is a very popular time of year. We start to warm up, the weather becomes nice to be outside. The pro shops are closed for public traffic, but the pro services and the golf operation proceeds on. Our tee sheets are generally being filled on these nice days and are quite full and almost full on the inclement weather days. The pro shop staff itself is there inside the buildings, and although they don't have the open doors yet, they still have merchandise and are able to talk to you via phone and make arrangements to get you your golfing needs. In the rec world, all rec facilities are still closed at this time. The tennis courts, the pickleball courts, are closed. The trails are open for your use, and we encourage all those that still are, wanting to work out and get their exercise to include those in their routine. The rec staff has been making videos to assist those that are homebound or those that choose to stay in for exercise classes. They've been working on trails, maintaining trails, building new trails, and also in building some new pocket parks. Food service at Telco Village, as most of you already know, the restaurants are closed, just as all the restaurants in the vicinity and probably the country are closed. The yacht club and the Kahiti clubhouse is taking orders for takeout and delivery service. And so we do have a limited food service that we can provide to our property owners. I do encourage you all to use those. And at some point in time in the near future, we'll be coming up through some sort of a phased reopening process, and food service will be reopened at some point in time, but not yet. Public Works is fully staffed, up and operating, but the management of the Public Works operation has instituted some pretty rigorous sanitation protocols. They are in the mornings, the routine is to sanitize all common equipment in common areas, and then again in the evening, the same process is put in place. They are trying to keep their distance with one another, trying to use one person per vehicle when physically possible. And also they have stepped up protocols for the essential services like water, sewer, and road maintenance and so forth, to make sure that we still have staff at all times to take care of our needs, to make sure that these systems are running. And on the basic COVID-19 report, Mr. President, for the operation of the village, that's it.
Okay, thank you. The next agenda item is the phased restart plan, but before I turn this over to Mitzi, just as background, we've asked that the staff start to develop plans to reopen all POA venues at some phased nature in the future. Mitzi is going to review a plan that is for the rec department, but all the other plans are in some form of completion. This doesn't mean that we're opening anything at this time. The governor's orders are still in place through the end of this month. Yesterday, he suggested that he may allow some businesses to open on the 27th, which is next Monday, but he did not release any guidelines. Those guidelines should be forthcoming within the next 2 or 3 days. So the plan that Mitzi is going to review with you could easily change if those guidelines are different than what we expect. We do know that in those guidelines will be the 6-foot distancing rules and the no groups bigger than 10 rules. So we can't totally resolve what our reopening plans will be until we know that. But we are developing the plans. But as a board, we need to be prudent because our village is the very definition of an at-risk community. Over 60, underlying health and immune system issues, and we travel a lot. So the board will consider those when we decide how we're going to reopen the village. Hopefully it'll be fairly soon, but it won't be 100%. So with that, Mitzi, please review the plan that we put together.
Thank you, Rick. What we've put together is a draft of the Recreation Department and how we would like to go about their reopening plan.
I would like to reiterate what Rick has said. Each department has actually put together their own plan for reopening, and they all are very different, based upon the nature of what it is that the service that they provide. But in the rec facilities, what I'll do is I'll kind of summarize this. Again, this is a draft. It's a working document. It's probably going to change every day between now and when we do start to reopen. But the facilities will be available to our members only by appointment. We will not allow guests right now at this time with this phase one. So again, if they have a guest pass, they will not be allowed to enter. There will be no discovery tours coming through at this time. We will also not allow contracted employees to come in, or contractors for that matter. It's just gonna be open for our members. Our activity start times will stagger every 15 minutes. We are, actually, the board looked at a few things this morning regarding the tennis courts and pickleball courts, but they will be open, and we would have a recreation facility employee out there watching, making sure that everybody is maintaining their distance. We are looking at, that is of course at the wellness center. We are looking at the process for Chota and Kahidi, in which we will allow people to slowly start back using the facilities there. The wellness center is going to open with reduced hours in the beginning. We're also gonna look at limiting the classes to 45 minutes per class with 10 people in those. Gina from Tennessee Orthopedic Clinic will be providing temperature checks to people coming in the buildings. That's a measure of precaution that we feel is very necessary at this time. Another thing to be aware of is you may be asked questions when you show up at these facilities as they're reopening, and the questions may be, have you been ill? Have you had a fever? Do you have a cough? Has anyone in your household had any of these symptoms? Also, have you traveled out of the area within the last 14 days? So this will be a common question that you're gonna begin to start hearing in each of the facilities in phase one as we start to reopen. This applies for our employees and property owners, so we're making sure that we are as safe as we can be in every area, in every avenue. Oh, sure.
That wasn't a problem.
That's because she's got a big mouth.
Okay, is the echo gone now? Is that better? Okay.
Temperature checks, you need to mention that beforehand.
Okay, so I'm gonna backtrack just a little bit. Again, we apologize, we are learning this new technology. Feedback noise. But one of the last things that I just mentioned is we do want to start administering temperature checks as people come into these buildings. We will be using Tennessee Orthopedic at the wellness facility. The lady's name is Gina. Many of you know her. She's already there and very familiar with our membership. But she will be actually taking temperatures as people come into the door, and also within all the other facilities as we begin to reopen. We have ordered the thermometers, and we plan on checking temperatures as people come in the door there. We just want to make sure that everybody's safe, both employees and property owners, and make sure that we are doing everything that we can to keep everybody safe during this time. I'm not sure if you want me to add phase two. We can talk about that real quick.
No, may I?
Yes, you may.
Okay. And I just have a question to the board and to Mitzi and to the recreation folks that have made this. And again, this is hugely different, and I understand. But when you go to the recreation department, and I walk up to the front door and there's an employee standing there who wants to take my temperature, and I don't want them to take my temperature.
Then you don't get in.
That needs to be louder. You need to say that louder.
Then you don't get in.
Okay, so then if I walk up and I feel that the questions that you're asking me, have I traveled outside of the area? Have I been sick? Have I been around a COVID-19 family member that's been sick? When I don't want to answer it because you're invading my privacy, what happens?
Then you don't get in.
Okay, so then if I then argue with you,
You still don't get in.
okay, and I want to make sure that everybody understands this is not just for the person that may have the virus, it is for anybody that you can infect. And this is the step that we're recommending that we take to protect us all. We've been really fortunate so far. and we want to stay that way. And issue the perfunctory apology. I apologize if you don't want your temperature taken, and you can't get in, but you won't. Thanks.
So any other board members have questions for Mitzi? Do we have any questions from outside, Beth? Okay.
Mr. President, I would just like to mention that discussion we had in coming up with this also, in addition to us having responsibility to protect the village, goes with it unsaid that there's a responsibility for individuals that goes with that too. And that responsibility is if you know that you've been sick or around somebody, don't show up, please, you know? And also, if you feel like someone's invading your space, back off, or ask them to back off. There's a responsibility that goes with getting us through this phase one.
Okay. If there's no other comment, can we call Clayton into the room? The next agenda item would be Public Works, and Clayton Taylor is going to present that. Thanks, Mitzi. Okay.
He's not here yet.
Okay, so Clayton isn't here yet, so we'll pass him and go on to the next agenda item, which is finance, presented by Parker Owen and remotely Kevin Ellsworth.
There we go.
Caught me with my mouth
Hopefully
full. I
everyone can-
thought I had
can
time to
we
finish
go
my
the
cookie.
Next page, please. Overall, I wanted to let everyone know that we had a very strong March.
Kevin, wait a second. Can we move the pictures so that they don't block the screen? There you go. Thanks. Kevin, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but people couldn't see the screen.
No, quite all right. March year to date, the month of March, we ended very strong. We had positive net income. We exceeded budget on revenue, and we had quite a bit of favorability on the expense side. So I don't think March was necessarily indicative of the new normal. We're being conservative as we go into April, but I'm happy to report that a lot of the non-financial performance metrics for the month and year to date continue to be strong. Our assessed lots obviously impacts our overall assessment revenue, is pretty much right at budget. We've got some favorability on headcount, obviously right now with the labor market. We're being cautious with open positions. Under Public Works, some good things. Property transfers for the month were 28 above budget, so almost double. And it continued to be strong even year to date. New home permits, we had 14 new home permits for the month of March versus a budget of only 11. So year to date, we're already at 42 versus a budget of 26. Miscellaneous permits are starting to catch up to budget. Obviously, the month of March was stronger than January and February, but miscellaneous permits continue to be strong, and I think that's more of a timing issue than anything. The tank installations continue to be strong as it moves with new homes. The water and sewer, both from a revenue and cost side, continue to be strong and exceeding budget. And I think that's really due to a lot of the safer at home, where people are using obviously their own water and sewer usage than in the past. Golf revenue, the revenue generating rounds for the month were basically right at budget, which is an outstanding number. And Chris Sykes often is telling people now that on a beautiful day, the tee sheets are absolutely full. So positive golf there. On the annual side, obviously that continues to be strong both month and year to date. For the docks and RVs, we continue to see a little bit of leakage there. We've got about 10 open docks and about 100 RV slots that the folks in admin are working hard to try to get full. And then on the rec side, obviously with things suspended during the month of kind of March and April, I don't have membership numbers. You'll see some revenue for rec, and that's really attributable to billings that had already taken place. But that'll end obviously April until the phased in reopening of those rec facilities. Next slide, please. So here overall, you'll see we're 112,000 favorable year to date on the revenue and 780,000 favorable on expense. So we're almost 900,000 ahead of budget, and obviously a very strong first quarter. Next slide. This is just a breakdown on the revenue side. Again, nothing unusual. Everything came in the first quarter as expected on relative to the budget. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown of revenue by detail. Obviously, assessments, since we're right at budget with assessed lots, not much there. The late fees is really a function of improved, better than budget with the number of delinquent accounts. So obviously monitoring collections and staying on top of that. That'll be a key metric for us to track going forward as the economic climate changes with COVID-19. But through March, we'll see a little bit a trade-off here of the late fee revenue with bad debt expense. On the golf, we actually exceeded budget year to date by $20,000. And under golf merchandise, we break this out separately for now, but we had a very strong March. Chris and the folks in the pro shops got very creative with their brand new inventory and their new approach to those pro shops of how to continue to sell merchandise. And that creativity paid off. They did very well with golf club sales as well as straight apparel. So, the month was strong. There's a little bit of timing here with January and February, but as things continue to stay open, I'm confident on the merchandise side, things will continue to go well. Like I mentioned on the rec, we're a little bit favorable just due to membership for the first quarter being above budget. That'll drop off temporarily in April. And then water and sewer, that's basically right at budget. And installed tanks is a function of the higher than budget volume for new homes. Little slippage on dock and RV, that's basically timing with the leased percentage that I talked about. ACC permits continue to be strong, so that's based all volume driven. CAF revenue is strong, and food service, which is primarily the Kahiti food sales, are $30,000 above budget. So the stay-at-home measures and staying within the community has done a great aspect for that. So that overall led us to 112,000 favorable year to date on revenue. Next slide, please. So this is just a graphical representation of kind of where we're at first quarter. You'll see we're trending a little bit higher than budget on the revenue, keeping expenses under control. That purple line that spikes, that's really the timing of HA5 coming through there. That will most likely shift a little bit later, given the slowdown in kind of the April-May timeframe with COVID-19. Next slide, please. So here on the expense side, obviously the maintenance line, we're 340,000 favorable year to date. What's really behind that variance is a lot of smaller repairs and updates. I'll get the board a more detailed list of those, but nothing material at an individual level. It's a lot of maintenance of common property, debris grinding, and some scheduled maintenance that Jeff normally does in the first quarter. The salary and benefit line obviously is tied to the open head count, and the bad debt line, that favorability is driven by the lower number of delinquencies. So we get hurt a little bit on the late fee side of revenue, and we make it up in the bad debt number here. Obviously, we're a little bit favorable right now on collection expense. Another thing to watch closely as we work with outside providers and our own internal accounting staff to monitor collections and make sure that those delinquencies stay in line. On the operating supplies, this is really a lot of timing of kitchen equipment. I know Mitzi had some new equipment planned for the kitchens, but given their status right now, that was obviously something that can be delayed. Yacht Club great room chairs, another item that can be delayed. We had some favorability in horticultural supplies and public works supplies. On the contract labor side, the favorability there is primarily some debris grinding with public works. And the Yacht Club management fee, again, AWE had a very strong March. So, we're working closely with them to kind of track what the expected volume and financial performance is for April and May. But, as things constantly change, we'll monitor that closely. The water and sewer cost of service, I'll talk a little bit about rate volume in a minute. The tank installation is really driven by volume. Marketing, we're favorable 9,000. That's really timing. The marketing program continues to be strong. The large builders and realtors that kind of participate in our marketing program, continue to, have activity in the village, just as we see in other areas. The obviously a little bit of golf merchandise cost of service going along with the higher sales, and then other is really kind of timing of board expenses, timing of accounting and payroll charges for about 22,000, timing of some consulting fees for 31,000. So, a few items in there that are relatively small. Next slide, please. So here you'll see where we, in the budget, expected to have a loss in the first 3 months, and we've actually, showed small profit in January and February, and then March came in at almost exactly 200,000 in net income. So, trying to maintain that financial strength along with how we ended 2019 very strong puts us in a very good position to kind of wait out the storm with COVID-19. So as we kind of go week by week cautiously, we still feel confident that the back half of the year from a financial perspective will be strong. Next slide. So here, this is just the basically a detailed P&L by month. and you'll see again, there's nothing really stands out as far as an anomaly in the trend. March was very strong, and there's a lot of things that'll continue to be that way going forward. So very optimistic. Next slide, please. So here is a rate volume for water and sewer, both on the revenue side as well as the cost. Again, as we go through the year, I've got 1 month that's an accrual, and then obviously 2 months of actuals now. So as the year progresses, it'll that year-to-date rate volume becomes more accurate. So you'll see on the rate side, there's a few ins and outs between water and sewer. A lot of favorability on the volume side, which is higher gallon usage. Some key numbers to point out on like water revenue. We're above budget, almost 300,000 gallons. And on the sewer revenue, we're also, since it's tied to water, we're also favorable there. So warranty revenue and expense, we're basically right at budget, which at this point is very good. I think a lot of the stuff that we've seen in previous years with water intrusion has been addressed. Besides higher volumes, I think everything's working fine with the water and sewer. Next slide, please. This is just a walk from the budget down to year-to-date actuals for both water and sewer and installed tanks. It incorporates the rate volume detail from the previous slide, but you'll see where obviously a lot of the volume is coming through the warranty activity. And on installed tanks, the piece I want to point out is the volume variance, where we had 16 additional tanks. So there was a budget of 26, and we've actually come in so far at 42 tank installations. So again, water and sewer are going well. Next slide, please. So here, I won't spend a lot of time in all this detail. I'll just kind of point you through some key points on the golf rounds report. Total member rounds at the very bottom right, we're 755 rounds favorable. So the key things to look at is you'll notice the member rounds, the 18 holes, we're off 213. The prepaid member rounds for 18, we're off 614. This will be offset partially by we had some favorability on the guest rounds, which is the next slide. But on here, if you look at the annual member rounds at the very bottom, that 264 plus the 1,318, our year-to-date golf rounds for what I call non-revenue generating rounds, in that they're all like an unlimited golf package, were favorable 1,582 rounds. So similar to what we saw last year with folks with that type of pricing package really taking advantage of the courses.
Question.
Next slide.
Question, Kevin. Just so that the people out there understand that may not have attended these meetings before, or golf advisory committees, you just talked about prepaid or unlimited being non-revenue generating rounds. Can you explain to them how a golfer can justify paying $3,200 a year and be referred to as a non-revenue generating golfer?
Well, I mean that.
That's me.
Pat, just in terms
I understand, but I want you to explain to the audience that is saying maybe a possibility they haven't been exposed to this before, to say you're letting people play unlimited golf and they're not generating revenue. That's not fair. But I'm here to tell you that you just referred to me as a non-revenue generating golfer, and I just gave you $3,200.
Well, you're just a slug.
Well,
I'm a
that's what I was
slut,
clarifying. By that statement, I meant that the rounds itself, the metric, does not correlate directly to the revenue that gets recognized through the income statement. So obviously the rounds, every individual golfer goes through the break-even analysis of how many rounds he or she would need to golf for that pricing model to make sense. And when you have an unlimited model pricing, unlimited golf, obviously you could use the heck out of it in very nice days and get more than your money's worth. We recognize that revenue as a deferred revenue on the balance sheet until time expires. So since it's an annual membership, it gets recognized different percentages each month, but that 100% of that $3,000 gets recognized over the full year that he or she can golf. So from that perspective, the rounds are disconnected from how revenue comes through the P&L. That is the only, it still generates revenue for the village, but it's just how that metric needs to be understood.
Yeah, I got it. I understand.
Okay. Next slide, please. So here on the guest rounds, like I said, that very good news. 217 rounds favorable to budget on the guest side.
Question
And,
again. Question again. Can you describe to me what a guest round is?
I believe it's when someone that is not a villager brings someone in as a guest, and they pay a, I'm not sure if they pay a full rack rate, but it's certainly the higher cost round.
Yeah, it's a reduced rate. They do get a discount because they're a guest of a member. Then there's what's called a rack rate. That's a real expensive round of golf. Somebody from Knoxville, non-Tellico Village, comes in, not a guest. They pay a lot of money for that. And for the sake of folks that are very in tune for the revenue and rounds conversation that we just had, these people generate a great deal of revenue for Tellico Village, true? Yeah. I'm not getting a yes or no. They generate a lot of revenue in golf. And,
Yes, they do.
and the controversy among the golfers is there's a lot of people that don't think we should allow these people to play as guests on our golf courses. But the other side is they generate a lot of revenue, and we give all Tellico Village property owners, is it 2 weeks, folks? I think it's 10 days, 2 weeks, to get on Chelsea and reserve Carlos down there. Is it 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks to reserve a tee time? Yeah, okay, I got a head nod. So you can get 2 weeks in advance to reserve your tee time, and if you don't want guests to play at Tellico Village, here's my challenge to everybody. Book 100% of the tee times. Get a friend, get a neighbor, and everybody play golf, and that way guests can't play. Because we give those tee times to the guests in unused tee times that members aren't using, and they generate a lot of money. Thank you.
And just to clarify that, outside guests who are not part of like a My Golf vacation package, they really can't reserve tee times until the tee sheet has been populated by members, which is 6 days in advance.
Okay. Next slide, please. So for cart rounds, year to date, we're 972 cart rounds, we're 1,329 cart rounds favorable to budget. And I think part of this, obviously with the end of March going into April, some of this I think has to do with the distancing policies that are in place, where we're actually seeing more cart usage, as well as, even outside carts coming in and being rented. So I think Chris continues to do a good job of kind of stressing the importance of this. So total rounds of golf were 972 rounds favorable year to date. And our overall riding percentage is also favorable to budget by just over 4%. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll hand it over to Parker Owen, who will talk to you about the CFO's report.
Beth's got a question.
Okay.
Kevin, we have a comment on the live chat. They want to know, do we have a cash flow analysis for Q1 and cash flow forecast for the remainder of the year?
We do. Parker is going to be talking about the cash flow through the end of March, and then we've been working through cash forecasts for the remainder of the year. I will say, not to steal his thunder, but by virtue of being so far ahead of budget on net income and obviously trying to maintain CapEx, we're not that far off on depreciation, which will naturally lead to a very strong cash position right now.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good. Good comments on cash. We'll come back to that here in a few minutes. Like all of the organizations in the company, finance and accounting has adapted to the CDC guidelines to recognize social distancing, minimizing person-to-person contact, and working remotely where possible. Most of you probably know that the lobby to the administration building is closed, but that does not mean that work is not going on inside. It very much is. Your accounts are being maintained, deposits are being made, bills are being paid, and administrative work goes on every day. We are attending, we believe, to all of the individual needs for property owners' accounts. If you have any questions, you can call the POA office and someone will be there during regular business hours to assist you. And so life and work goes on despite the fact that the door to the building is closed. We did just recently, April the 1st, renewed our insurance renewals for TVPOA for the next policy year. Insurance rates have increased. It's driven by lots of factors, including loss experience of the major carriers in things like natural disasters and other areas. But we end up paying for part of that despite the fact that we had a very good loss history over this past year. We saw some unprecedented increases in cost and reduction of coverage for our umbrella policies and our directors and officers liability policies, and had to pay more for that coverage. You've heard a lot about various government programs of late to try to dampen the impact of the COVID-19 virus on businesses, and we are being affected just like lots of other businesses have been. You know that our wellness center, our fitness programs have had to close down for a period of time. Food service programs have been impacted, and so we have applied for an SBA loan. That's in process now. We do not know how that will turn out, but we are pursuing that if that funding is available to us. The annual audit is well underway. We expect to have draft financial statements probably by the end of this week, and are headed toward a reporting out of audited financial statements by the May 20th board meeting, so about 4 weeks from today. I will say from my discussions with the auditors that that process has gone smoothly and no surprises to this point. So in the world of auditing, no surprises is a good thing. We don't like surprise things to pop up. So going pretty well, and we expect a good reporting out here shortly. We have several capital projects that are underway, or the request for funding is underway. We can get the next slide up, please. Thank you. The first of these does require some action on the part of the board. This is to replace the current spray rig at Kahiti Golf Maintenance that has exceeded its useful life. It was budgeted for $45,000. The request is coming in just north of $54,000. Turned out that $45,000 just simply was not adequate to acquire the recommended equipment. The equipment is, however, very versatile. It's used for multiple applications, from bulk spraying, spot applications, green aeration, and bunker renovation, so it can do all kinds of things. The recommended low bid of $54,422 exceeded budget by $94.22. Kahiti Golf Maintenance had previously been authorized $35,000 for some bunker removals and renovations. So that project was $10,000 below budget, and so overall helps offset some of the overrun of the spray rig. We solicited 3 bids from the major suppliers. 2 of them replied, and we recommended the low bid, that being Greenville Turf and Tractor, John Deere. So this requires board attention for 2 reasons. First off, with the final quotes, it is exceeding $50,000, which is the CEO's limit for authorizing capital projects with no further board approval, and it also exceeded the budget amount by 10%. So with those 2 factors, it does require board approval, and I would ask that the board consider a motion to that effect to approve capital spending of $54,422. Funding is from unrestricted operating cash.
Okay, I need a motion to approve purchase of a spray rig for golf maintenance at a cost of $54,422, funded from unrestricted operating cash. Bruce moved. I need a second. I see.
No, I'll second.
Pat seconded.
Sure, yeah. Nobody-
Discussion.
Yeah, I have a question. I think Bexton needs, and thanks to Jordan Clark, we don't have to, he's the superintendent there. But would we be thinking along the same lines in this day and time with this cash if he did not justify this with a $10,000 savings on bunker renovation?
Would what now, Pat?
If you didn't, if the bunkers weren't in play, we would
He's,
still.
here, budget amount 45,000, requested amount 54,422. Okay, so I missed it a little bit, that's fine, but I went over the 10% on the budget, and now I'm just talking to the board here. Would we be willing to make the motion and second it if you didn't put the statement up there that I'm doing a bunker renovation and I saved you $10,000, therefore I am okay?
No, I don't think that's true.
Can I speak to that
Yes.
point?
Well, then my next question, yeah, you can, but my next question is why put that in there?
I wouldn't have.
I wouldn't have either.
Yeah.
Okay, can I speak to that question too?
Sure.
You may.
Okay. The capital project funding request form has a line on there that asks, if this project exceeds budget, what will that operating department or division head do to bring his department back within budget?
Yeah.
So we are required to address that issue when we have an individual project overrun. How is that department or area going to balance its capital budget?
Yeah.
And so that's the reason
And
that comment is
again,
in
I'm
there.
not being critical.
No.
The first thing I said is thanks to Jordan for doing this, because the hoops and the extent that this superintendent has gone to go out and get dirt and save contractors money and move it to this bunker renovation is just mind-blowing what he's done. Hats off to him, bow down to him, what a great job. He deserves all that $10,000. My question was to the board,
Yeah.
right? And I got my answer, thanks.
Any other questions from the board?
Steve had his hand up.
Steve?
Parker, is it possible to push this request out maybe 3 or 4 months so we can see what the actual impact is in our cash flows? As based upon your latest revised forecast, we're looking at lost revenues versus budget of almost 400,000, some lost gross profit off of water and sewer. We've only cut back 100 or 200,000. So I'd be more inclined to put this on the shelf, wait a couple of months and see if your forecast is close to actual. Hopefully actual is much better than that. And we've got more cash and we can go ahead and approve this.
Steve, I think the answer to that, the current piece of equipment is worn out, and this is a very important, critical piece of equipment. They use it virtually every day in golf course maintenance. So I think the answer from Kahiti Golf Maintenance would be that they can't wait. Now, we certainly could solicit that, response to that question, but that's certainly the indication that I've gotten.
Parker, do you know if the equipment is still operable?
You can cut someplace else to pay for this until we know what the financial results are going to be the next couple of months.
I didn't catch the entire gist of that question, Steve, I'm sorry.
Well, the other alternative is if you could cut 54,000 of spending someplace else for a couple of months until we see how the cash flow goes in order to do this project now. It's an all cash issue for me.
Well, cash is in very good shape. Current cash balance is about $5.1 million total, and every expectation the cash will continue to build.
Hold it. You can't have two people talking at the same time.
A little over $300,000 worse than planned because you're losing revenue because of the COVID-19 impact. So I'm wondering, is this piece broken and you can't use it, or could they get by for another couple of months and let's see what the cash looks like against what you're forecasting?
Okay, did you hear that, Steve? The current machine is inoperable.
I think,
did not.
was this the one that blew
No,
the head gasket?
Chris Sykes just texted Mitzi with the answer to the question that I asked, which is, was the machine still operable? And the answer is no.
Okay.
This machine, I was getting a couple of them perhaps a bit confused. This is the machine that actually blew a head gasket or had a cracked head just a week ago.
Yeah,
So it's
and-
worn out.
And this is weed season, folks.
This is the time of year you need it.
Yeah, this is weed season. Yeah. So it's now or you're gonna live with it the rest of the summer.
Yes.
Can I go back to Parker and Kevin and ask them to elaborate on our financial position? Do you think it's as dire as Steve is painting the picture? Because my impression is that we're in pretty good shape. Revenue lost or not, we're in pretty darn good shape, are we not?
Let Parker answer that question.
Okay, I'll give the answer that I started right after the first of the year, that we finished 2019 in excellent shape. Cash balance as of the beginning of the year, total cash was $4.3 million. Since that time, we've added $800,000 to our cash balance through the end of March. With the deferred maintenance and capital spending that Kevin talked about earlier, we'll see cash build up through the rest of the year. But it's not adequate just to get us through this year. We've also got to come back around next year and pay the piper for projects that are deferred. So short answer to that question, I think we're in excellent shape. We're making adjustments as we need to operations, but yes, we have enough capital and cash in the bank to very comfortably handle this capital project and many other needs.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to circle back to Steve here.
Okay, I'm not suggesting we're in poor financial health. We have adequate cash supplies. What I'm suggesting is just because you start out the year in great financial shape on a cash basis, and because we're deferring capital and expense to next year, and the cash balances look fine here, that doesn't give us any right to spend cash now that we have lost because we have less revenue projected. What I'm trying to say is we need to protect the position we're in and continue to grow based upon our budget and based upon the latest forecast. There's over $300,000 of cash that we thought we were going to have from this plan against these specific items, and we don't. Not saying we're in financial ruin, it's just saying we're giving up 300,000 in cash that we were planning on having. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Pat?
100% agree, Steve, 100%. But you still have to run the business. If the sewer pump listen, if the sewer pump breaks down, you need to buy a newer sewer pump. If you need an inventory of sewer or electrical or water, has been requested, then we need that inventory. And if you can't spray this asset that we call a golf course to prevent weeds or overgrowth, then you're going to pay for it later. So you can't use the argument we're deferring to later and then say I can't spend now because I don't have the money because I'm going to have to defer. You're going to need this, and it's one of those items that you just bite the bullet and pay. It's going to require us to maintain the asset, and this is one of the requirements. Unfortunately, it's $54,422.
Mr. President,
Yes.
in defense of what Steve is trying to say,
I
I
know
think
it.
he's trying to say is, yes, we agree that we need to do this and buy this piece of equipment now and move on. But what he's also saying is, as you go through this COVID-19 and you're looking at the impact, irrespective of the fact that we go into this year good, what we need to do is, now that we know that we have to spend this cash for this, what we ought to be doing is looking at other expenditures that we may have during this COVID thing. And if we can hold back on those, then we hold back on those until we get through this thing. I think that's what you're trying to say, right, Steve? Or Steve,
Yeah, and
what?
since the answer came back that this equipment no longer operates, it's a no-brainer. You got to go get it. I was responding to the question that Winston raised, that I was claiming we were in dire financial straits, which we're not.
Okay. Any other comments on the motion? With that, I'm going to ask for a vote. All those in favor, right hand. Okay, 7-0.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next project is the purchase of a Ventrac 4500Z tractor and accessories. This piece of equipment would be used at all three courses. It was budgeted at $48,000. It's coming in right on the money, $48,012. This does not require board approval as it is within the CEO's approval authority, but it is being presented for information. Likewise, it was presented at Finance Advisory Committee last Friday for information. The Golf Advisory Committee had earlier reviewed and recommended its approval. This mower allows for safe and efficient mowing of tall grass, lakes, and creek banks, steep slopes, course perimeters, risk maintenance work that otherwise would have to be performed by hand. It can do it more efficiently and more safely. It also can be outfitted with various attachments to perform jobs such as stump grinding. Will be shared by all three courses and was budgeted as such. This is a demo machine that is being recommended. Therefore, it's a sole source provider. The demo machine currently available at a reduced price, lower than what full retail price would be for a brand new machine. The equipment is from LADS, and $48,012 includes recognition of single item sales tax rates. So I don't really need a board motion or approval per se, but we'll be happy to respond to questions. This has been approved through the CEO's signature.
Parker, as it is a demo machine, what kind of warranty is it carrying?
I don't know the answer to that.
Can you get back to me on that?
I certainly can.
Warranty.
He says full.
Chris Socks on there.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Good.
That answers my question.
Okay, Chris, I'm glad you joined us. That's very helpful.
So, yeah, he's in the dark there, right?
Well, he may be in the dark there, but he's shedding light on this meeting, so that's,
Oh, geez. You know, that's a groaner if I ever heard one.
okay, moving right along. Next slide. These are some smaller projects, fairly routine replacements. This one at Tokwa Golf Maintenance to replace the old KB3 blower that has exceeded its useful life. Was budgeted at $9,500, coming in right on the money. Same sort of deal, Finance Committee reviewed it, was not required that they approve or recommend it. Golf Advisory Committee did recommend its purchase and approval. So this new blower replaces a 13-year-old blower that no longer performs up to standards. It is a sole source provider. Greenville Turf and Tractor is the only supplier of this model equipment in the region, and apparently this is the model that Golf Maintenance prefers due to performance reasons. So including taxes, $9,500. Again, within budget, within the CEO's approval authority. No further action is required, but be happy to answer questions.
Any questions on this? Okay, roll on.
Okay, and I think finally, I think this is the last one, yes. Purchased 2 weather-tight secure storage pods for equipment storage at Tokwa Golf Maintenance. Budgeted at $9,000, coming in just over $7,000. Same sorts of deals. FAC did review it, but approval not required. Golf Committee recommended its approval. The 2 pods include a 20-foot and a 40-foot length. They're basically weather-tight trailers, sort of like container shipping type containers. And this will help free up space in the work areas in the Tokwa Golf Maintenance shop. The supplier is local. Didn't really make sense to shop this outside of the area because of shipping. Just makes it uneconomical to look beyond the local area. But both trailers, including taxes, $7,041. This has received the CEO's approval signature, and so no further action required. But questions?
2.
I got one too.
2 questions. If Chris is still there. Chris, you still there? Maybe not.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good deal. This is Pat. Where are the 20 and 40-foot lengths going? This is the size, the 40-foot is the size of a tractor trailer.
Yeah, that was my question too.
And the 20 is the length of a short trailer. So where are they going?
They're hidden behind the Tokwa Golf Maintenance Facility, out of sight. You'll never see them.
Okay, that's good. Hidden.
Will they be visible from any homes in the area?
No more visible than any other part of our facility, which is screened off at this time.
Okay,
Okay, and what color are they?
We're going to paint them brown to match our
Okay,
building.
there you go.
Okay, so we're buying these and not leasing them?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because that was my second question. If we're leasing or renting, then is there insurance on this because we bump when we buy it? So,
We're buying these.
we're
Buying it.
Okay, good.
I hate leasing, but that's
No,
the
you
side.
didn't. But I thought you might have slid one by you.
So he's gonna camouflage them.
I lease the Pitney Bowes postage machine because I have no other alternative, but other than that, that's about it.
So perhaps we could get the Tellico Village Art Guild or artists to go over
They
there.
can draw trees and bushes on the side.
Yeah, something, yeah, so that it would blend in or would just look perfect.
Okay, let's move on if there are no other questions then to the capital summary. At this point, we've approved about 21% of the 2020 capital plan, roughly 4% under budget for those projects approved to date. And you see the budget and authorized amounts going down the first 2 columns and variances off to the side. So this summary does include those projects that you saw today in this presentation. And then finally, to come back to the issue of cash flow, The budgeted cash flows for the full year are illustrated on the left-hand side, well, it's about the center of the page, the left-hand column of numbers. This year's budget is funded mostly from current year's cash flows and a modest drawdown of reserves. The drawdown of reserves primarily due to the water tank that would draw down the water and sewer reserve for its funding. The budget figures of the full year 2020, the year-to-date variances from budget are through March 2020 operations, and this does not reflect changes in working capital. But going back to the comments that Kevin Ellsworth made earlier, net income through first quarter had a favorable variance of $892,000. Projecting that out as a favorable variance over budget would put us at a full year favorability, or excuse me, a full year net income figure just over $1.5 million. That is, if we are right on budget for the remaining 9 months of the year. Similarly, depreciation is less than budget to this point, and that the reason for that is capital projects have not been approved as rapidly as they were slotted in the original budget. We've asked all department and division heads to be very judicious as they bring forth capital projects for funding requests. So a number of items are going to slide either later into the year or possibly be deferred into next year. And the capital expenditures, we've got a small favorable variance, $23,000 and change. So net cash flow down to that point, we had budgeted for the full year a decrease in cash of $367,000. But if this year-to-date variance holds through the rest of the year, we would project about a $500,000 increase to cash by year end. Now, I'll be the first and the quickest to say, well, there's still a lot of year left, and don't count your chickens before we hatch them. But and particularly in this environment, we're watching this every day, every week, and we'll be reporting back to you all throughout the year on where we stand on cash and all of the budget items.
Any questions for Parker? Are there any questions from the outside? Beth? No? Okay, thank you, Parker.
Thank you.
Make sure you clean up after yourself there. Okay, so next up, we're going to circle back around to pick up Clayton Taylor talking about public works projects.
Sorry I wasn't in here when y'all started. I was in the parking lot. So we'll talk about these projects if we'll move to the next slide. You know, with this COVID-19, you know, a lot of things have slowed us down. Everybody's back to work now, so you know, in our department, but you know, we're still doing things by conference calls and stuff with Jacobs and stuff like that. So it slowed things down. Things have changed a bunch, but we are still on top of things. So the water tank, I know we had some conversation about the water tank earlier, but like the slide says, currently we're at about 30% design and working toward the 60%. Again, this COVID thing has slowed us down because we keep having to do conference calls, and it's just not as effective as sitting down and looking at someone face to face and working through those things.
Yeah, I'll testify to that.
Yeah, it slows things down. We are still working on a few details. You know, we are at that point. We were talking with Adam after the session this morning. We're looking at sometime around mid to end of June to start bidding that project out. So we are moving forward. So that is a positive.
When you say bid now, you mean construction?
Yes. Yeah. So that is, you know, we are continually working forward. Even though things have slowed down, we still stand after it. So that is a positive. Next slide. this timeline, if you look at this timeline, it shows that, and we would be doing bidding and end of mid-April toward the end of May. You can scoot that out about a month. So, that's where we're at. So then we're talking maybe starting construction around July. That is our goal. Hopefully, maybe things will continue to move on. I know we've talked to, some people about contractors, are they continuing to work? And they are working. It's just the way you do things have changed, so it's slow things down. Next slide. Next. So, any questions about the tank before we move on? Okay. This is the sinkhole down by 5 Star. That's on Chattooga Drive West. Been a big deal. There's a lot of utilities in that area, so we had to relocate a lot of utilities. LUB had to move electric lines. We had to move sewer lines. We had to do boring under the streets to where we can totally move them out of the way. We had Geo Services come down, do some test bores to find the rock, bedrock, and it was at 34 feet. So we are digging. We're digging. We've been trying to get the fiber optic moved, but that's not going to happen. So our plan is this week, we will pour concrete by Friday. We're closing in on the throat of that sinkhole. We will stop that up, pour concrete by Friday, give it the weekend to set up. Then next Monday, we should start backfilling with rock and get that project finished up. Any questions about that?
How much concrete are you putting in that hole?
Well, we don't know. We got to
You're
see how big
estimating.
it is. I would hate to say how many yards. We got to see how big of a throat that we have to that, and then we'll figure out how much of a ledge we want to put on it and how thick. So,
Yeah.
you know.
Do you put in filler before you put concrete
Yeah,
in?
what we'll do when we find a throat to that sinkhole, we will stop it up with like some shot rock, big shot rock. That way it'll keep that hole closed off until that concrete can set up. Now, it may never fall out, but if it does fall out, we'll have a huge slab on top of that throat. That way it can't ever go back down through the hole.
Okay. So are we gonna see a line of concrete trucks all the way down 444 blocking our
Well,
way?
they're gonna stage out of your driveway.
Yeah, right.
The plan is to keep traffic flowing.
Okay.
So that's been one thing about this project. We've kept utilities on all the time, and we're keeping traffic to be able to flow also.
The question online is, what is the engineer's rec for amount of concrete? Whatever that means, RAC.
Well, I mean, at this time, no one can recommend how much concrete because we've not found a throat and decided how big the throat is and how big of an area when we need to pour concrete on anyway. So we're not to that point to deciding how much concrete.
Well, since that seems to be an interesting question, as soon as you find out, could you let Beth know and you tell us, Beth, through the telegram or?
Sure.
Interesting subject, how much concrete?
Okay. Any other questions for Clayton?
Bruce would like to know.
No questions.
Is that it?
Well, Clayton,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We had a question from Parker. Can we ask it now?
Yeah, Clayton, don't leave. I want to talk to you about something.
The question from Parker's presentation, it said the large golf course truck, are we going to scrap it or sell it that you asked for the replacement?
You mean the spray rig? Must be the spray rig.
Spray rig, I would guess scrap it, but could you get an answer?
I do. The 20-year-old spray rig will be used for parts as it is not repairable, and the 13-year-old Buffalo blower will be used for emergency backup. Both machines far exceeded useful life and have no real value.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thanks.
Parker.
Okay. One of the questions that I get asked on a fairly significant number of bases, is with COVID-19, as the board forgot about Asian carp. And in my recent TVB presentation, I answered that with these two words, absolutely not. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carla. And Carla's going to talk to us about Asian carp, which, by the way, we update every time we come to this meeting.
Thank you, Rick. And I'd like to introduce our guest today, who is Dennis Baxter. And Dennis Baxter, some of you may recognize from a meeting that was held at the Yacht Club that several groups attended. And he is with TVA. And Dennis is the manager of river and reservoir compliance monitoring for TVA. And so thank you very much for joining us. And Dennis has a previous engagement. He only has about 25 minutes with us. So I'm going to let him speak first, and then I'll give you our committee recap. So Dennis, I'm going to see how technologically savvy I am and try to share your presentation. So hopefully everybody can see that. And Dennis, when you're ready, you can go ahead and begin.
Carla, we can only see your face. We cannot see the presentation.
Go back to see if I got my screen sharing. Oh, here we go. Needed to push one more button. How about that?
Well, now we've got a black, there it is.
There you go. Okay.
Okay.
There's Dennis.
All right. Now, whenever you're ready.
There you go. I see it now. Hi, my name's Dennis Baxter. I work for the Tennessee Valley Authority.
He needs to speak
And
up.
Today I want to discuss
Can't hear him.
the status of Asian carp in the valley. Next slide. Of course, most of you know there are actually 4 species of Asian carp in the valley. We have the big head, the silver, the grass, and the black carp. They're found mainly in the lower portion of the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. And we do have grass carp that have been stocked in past years in our reservoirs now, but they're very rare. Next slide. So the biggest question we hear most of the time, how did Asian carp get to the United States? And basically they were used with aquaculture farmers to help them with different problems they have in culture ponds. So they were imported to control algal problems and also snail problems. So the big head and the silver carp are planktivores, so they eat plankton. So if you have plankton blooms in your ponds, that you want to stock those along with your other species that you're culturing, and it would be a dual purpose in that pond where each fish would be eating different things. So you could actually have a double harvest, if you will. So that's one reason why I did it. Plus, certain snails carry certain fish diseases, and to reduce the amount of snails in your culture ponds, you'd want to stock a black carp. And black carp are molluscivores, and they eat snails and mussels and whatnot. So how did they get spread into the waters? Well, it's pretty simple. If you have a pond in Arkansas, Missouri, and typically you're going to have them at low elevations where you can fill the ponds readily with water. All it takes is a few floods. The big flood, 1980, and the big river flood in the 1990s. They basically compromised ponds and allowed the fish to escape of the streams and rivers all the way through the Mississippi River Valley. And they spread rapidly. So Asian carp were found in the Ohio River back in the 1990s. So they've been there for a long time, but they've been there, and the Ohio River is perfect for them to reproduce successfully. And so their numbers have been building, and now they're starting to migrate and move up the different river systems. Next slide. So the distribution in Tennessee is the map that you see right here. You can see the Mississippi River to the left, is, inundated with Asian carp. You've got the Tennessee River, and you also have the Cumberland River system that have been infested with Asian carp, mainly silver carp. But there are big head there, and there are black, but mainly silver. And of course, we have grass carp throughout the valley. And like I said, they've been stocked for other reasons a long time ago. So, and we have had one report, and it's a report, it's not a confirmation, of one silver carp found in Chickamauga Reservoir. And that was a picture of a silver carp in the bottom of a boat with no landmarks, no metadata for the picture, just the citizen saying, hey, I reported this. It was found in October. TWA didn't get reported until late December, early January. And so now there's no reason why TWA would disbelieve this person because they feel he's credible, but there's not enough data there to, confirm it. Basically, what TWA needs is that fish put on ice and taken to their lab so they can verify that it existed. Now, having said that, we're not saying they're not there, but we're saying if they are, they're extremely rare, because since this report, TWA has been searching, and my crews, we've searched the entire Chickamauga Reservoir's coves and embayments, looking with side scanning sonar, looking for targets and verifying these targets to see what fish species they are. And we have not found any Asian carp so far. And we've also had other projects on that reservoir collecting fish, and we haven't seen any Asian carp then. So I know TWA and in my groups, if we're out there sampling, we're going to be on the lookout. Plus, the good news is we have thousands of fishermen and anglers and recreators out there. If they see something, hopefully they'll say something. Next slide. So the Asian carp distribution and environmental DNA. So a lot of people say, well, why don't we just do the environmental DNA everywhere? Well, we could, but environmental DNA is not 100% effective because you're looking at different proteins in these tests. So if you have fish parts in a bilge pump in a barge, or birds can carry these things, typically you can get some false positives. So, but what these programs are designed, you have to take several samples to get several positives before you can say, yes, there are fish upstream at this point of that species. So TWA is investigating and more likely will invest in some more eDNA samples in Chickamauga and Watts Bar reservoirs. So that would be good when and if that occurs. That way we'll have another tool in our toolbox looking for these fish. Next slide. So a lot of fishermen out there will see fish come out of the water and leap, catch fish, and they'll say, my gosh, there's silver carp everywhere. We've heard reports on Gunnersville that they saw 6 giant silver carp underneath this dock during the Bassmasters Classic. Well, more than likely that they weren't Asian carp, they were these other species. So on the left, that is the silver carp. Okay, on the right, you have smallmouth and black buffalo, they're spawning right now. And just upstream of where you guys are in Citico Creek, there's a buffalo run that occurs this time of the year every year, where all these fish migrate out of the lake and go and spawn. The fish on the bottom, that's a carp sucker. That is actually a quillback carp sucker, and it's shiny and silvery. And a lot of times when these fish throughout the year can and will jump out of the water. Next slide. So mistaken identities, very common. But we want people to report, take a picture, send it. We'll try to identify it for you. And you can see these pictures right here. If you're a fisherman and you like to fish for fish with bait, a lot of people will actually buy bait or catch bait with cast nets, and all these fish look the same, and there are 4 different species here. So you've got on the left, you've got the threadfin shad, which is on the top on the green bucket lid, and on the bottom fish is actually a silver carp. They look almost the same. If you're not a taxonomist, you wouldn't know it. So this is why fishermen unknowingly will use bait. They'll catch bait at one dam, travel to several different reservoirs and fish for stripers and other fish. And when they get done, they throw their bait in the water. Well, that's called bait bucket introduction. And that's how these fish can spread, regardless of all the measures we use throughout the year. And on the right side, we have alewife and blueback herring. Next slide. So the Mississippi Interstate Cooperative Resource Association, which is MICRA, and it is an umbrella organization with 28 state and federal partners. And so throughout the whole Mississippi Valley Basin, we all coordinate and share our resources, number one, to address interstate fishery problems. So we've worked together with sturgeon, paddlefish, walleye, sauger, etc. Now it's the invasive species and Asian carp that this group's working on. And so MICRA is a really important organization because it helps coordinate all these state agencies and federal partners to get information for a common goal. So to make sense of all this, basically we have 6 Mississippi River sub-basins, and we are located in the Ohio sub-basin because the Tennessee and Cumberland flow into the Ohio River, so we're part of that Ohio sub-basin. So we work with the state of Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and that's all. And I'm getting my internet connections unstable, but hopefully we can continue. So like I said, TVA participates in the Tennessee Cumberland sub-basin, and that's part of the Ohio River Basin. Next slide. So the objectives of MICRA is pretty simple. Number one, we've got to understand these fish before we can find tools to control them. So we had to conduct targeted sampling surveillance. Early detection is very important. So that's why if you see Asian carp or think you did, get a picture of it, save the fish on ice, get it to the state resource agencies to get it identified, because we really need to know if they're really here, then we can start addressing these issues. We need to know the population characteristics. So where do they actually go in the spring? Where do they spawn? Where can they spawn successfully? There's a lot of questions we need to answer. And we're collecting data, every year on all these different river systems and sharing this information so we can understand, oh yeah, we can do this and we can use these tools. And yeah, if the fish do get further upstream, we can control that. And not saying that they're not going to come upstream. The state resource agencies are pretty convinced they can manage this if we use all the tools in our toolbox. So number one, got to know population characteristics and then evaluate lock and dam passage. So we're doing that right now at Barkley Lock and Dam and on Lock and Dam 19 on the Mississippi River. So we have a bunch of fish tagged with radio transmitters, and we're trying to understand, how do they use these locks? What conditions do they like to move and what conditions they won't move, and throughout the year. And we're gaining that information. So if we can find certain areas, that are pinch points where these fish are congregating, and then we can get in there with the different tools at hand. And I'll discuss several of them here shortly of how to get these fish out of the system. Because number one, we want to reduce the population so we don't have any issues. So the national, in the best places we can control this invasive species. We need to effectively plan, implement, and evaluate management and control efforts. And that's why we're sharing a lot of data. That's why we're getting money from Congress. That's the Fish and Wildlife Service is the federal lead and is the micro facilitators. And so all the 28 state and federal partners in micro, we all vote on where that money is spent and where can we get the best bang for that buck, because that money is finite. It doesn't go that far. The states are also putting in money, and the federal partners are putting in money into these programs to get this information that we need. Next slide. So who is responsible? That's the biggest question I'm asked all the time. And they think, well, TVA, you ought to be responsible. Well, not necessarily. Number one, the states are responsible for managing the fisheries. Okay. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, like I said earlier, obtains the funds from Congress and facilitates the program, the micro program, where that money is spent. The U.S. Corps of Engineers, they operate the locks, and they also operate the dams on the Cumberland system. And TVA manages water and operates dams on the Tennessee River system. So the states don't want federal partners managing the fisheries, and we do not want the states managing the dams and locks. So there's a niche for everyone. So next slide. So can these fish be stopped? Next slide. So the answer is yes. So the first actions to do that, number one, like I said earlier, you need to understand population dynamics. So these fish are schooling fish. Okay. So since they school fish, we've actually tagged a bunch of fish with radio transmitters. So far, we've got 400 of them tagged in the Pickwick and Kentucky reservoirs. That's where the leading edge of these Asian carp are. And these fish are called Judas fish. So we're using them to give away their secrets. Where do they go throughout the year? Where do they stage? Let them tell us where the pinch points are, and let them tell us where the leading edge of the Asian carp are. We're actually tagging more fish as we speak. As soon as the water goes down, the states and the other federal partners will be tagging more fish. So the fish can be effectively netted where we find these pinch points, and then we can recapture some of these fish to get information on how fast are they growing, what is the survival rate, that kind of information. And number one, if we can identify where these pinch points are and where these schools are, then we can get the commercial fishermen in, and we can remove these fish by tons throughout the year. And there is another technique that we used. It's called the modified unified method that the USGS, that's the research arm of the government, they actually found this type of method of netting off whole embayments in coves, and where they put in several nets and they're making cells. And so what they do is they herd these fish from one cell to the next until they get them into one tight ball, if you will, of fish. And then they use these giant vacuum pumps to pump them out into holding tanks so they can get rid of them. And on President's Day, that was February 17th, Senator McConnell, Representative Comer, Governor Brashear from Kentucky, and several dignitaries came for a demonstration of the modified unified method system. And in that 2-week period, it was projected they were going to remove 250,000 tons of carp. And for the few days that they started this program for Senator McConnell's demonstration, they removed 17,000 tons for just a few days. So that was very effective. And the state of Kentucky's planning to do 10 of those type events on the Kentucky and Barkley reservoirs this year to remove as many Asian carp as they can. And that's important because if we can remove a bunch of these carp, population density is going to be low, and that's fewer fish that can migrate upstream. Next slide. So we're calibration of the sub-basin agencies and university, or collaboration, excuse me, that calibration on my mind. The collaboration that we are using is, number one, we're using Tennessee Tech to tag a lot of these fish. So the state of Tennessee has a contract with the university. They send out crews of students and their resident fisheries biologists to tag a bunch of these fish and track fish, put out receivers. And so that's pretty good. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service doing it. The USGS is doing it. All the states are doing it. And in TVA, we participate. And it's really important because what we do is we have receivers to receive the signal of these sonic tags spread throughout the whole Tennessee Valley. Okay, these receivers are the same receivers we use for the sturgeon and tracking sturgeon that are tagged. So we covered the system faster than we could because we're already using the same technology we're using now. So that's really good. So collaboration with the states, the universities, and other federal partners, extremely important, especially for surveying relative densities, because it is labor intensive. You go out there and do a bunch of netting, it's extremely labor intensive. It takes several men and boats to get this work done. Just to set the receivers and transmitters takes several crews. And we have these things set up at different pinch points throughout the river at the locks and different entrances to different embayments. So if these fish are using certain embayments or tributaries to spawn, we'll know. So this is good information because if we can identify where they're at, we can get commercial fishermen in there to remove them. So we're all working together. It's extremely important that number one, we can get this information to the right people in the resource agencies so we can remove these fish. Plus, this information is going to provide vital information to any environmental assessments that are written for deterrent barriers. And so TVA, we are preparing to write a programmatic environmental assessment to install barriers on 10 of our lock and dams in the Tennessee River system. Now that's just an assessment to see if there's any problems or viable. And we're doing that to be proactive because if these barriers are needed, then we don't have to wait a year and a half for the documentation and the NEPA environmental assessment to be completed. We can, if we have the need and the leading edge is coming to certain dams, we have an opportunity to install these things sooner than we would have. So that's why we're trying to be proactive and do the survey early. So we're working on that. We're working with a collaboration team with all the state and federal partners, and we're getting all the information that we possibly can, from mussel surveys to the USGS data, which barriers work best, which situations. So that's good. And I wanted to give kudos out to Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. They are stepping up and actually conducting mussel surveys below the Tennessee lock and dams, likewise with the Alabama resource agencies. So that vital information, we won't have to wait for surveys. They're just going to go out and proactively collect that information now. So that's great news. Next slide. So number one, we're trying to fill knowledge gaps. So number one, we need to understand distributions of these fish, habitats, what type of habitat do they use, what time of year, throughout the whole subbasin. So what we can learn from the Ohio River, we can apply it to other rivers and tributaries in the Tennessee Valley. So that's really good information. And so if we share information through Micra, we're learning a lot than we normally would have if we're just doing it by ourselves. So number one, very important, we need to determine the extent of spawning throughout the system. We need to look for movement within the system, and that will provide us life history and population dynamics information that we desperately need for site-specific models. And this information is going to help us determine any type of control needs or invasion impacts on the native fauna, the native fish. So this is very important, especially for spawning, because the best thing, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, is these Asian carp have not successfully spawned in the Tennessee and Cumberland River systems. Only one time we've seen young of the year, which was in 2015. So in about 8 years, we haven't seen any reproduction other than that 1 year. And we're not sure if that reproduction came up through the locks from the Ohio River or not, because, you know, they swim almost like shad and they can migrate through just as easy as could be. So the reason why we haven't seen any reproduction is we have high head dams compared to the Ohio River, they have low head dams. And that means our reservoirs, the water slows down in the middle of the reservoir. And when that water slows down in the middle of the reservoir, these Asian carp eggs are slightly negatively buoyant. They will sink to the bottom, and once they get into the sediment, they'll smother and die. So that may be a great attribute of our high head dam systems, and that's probably what saved us so far. So these fish, they're spawning, but the eggs aren't surviving to larvae. So which is good. Next slide. So will the Asian carp affect fisheries? Of course, it's unknown at this time. TVA, we have a long-term monitoring database that we look at reservoir ecological health, all the different factors, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. And what we're trying to do right now is use high-level statistics to figure out, number one, before the Asian carp came into our system, you know, how has the weather changed the fisheries expectations, if you will, our scores, and the abundance of these fisheries? Because we know high water years affects the fisheries, low water years, drought affects the fisheries. So we're wanting to see this trend. That way we can tease that out and see, okay, when an invasive species come in, how does it affect the fishery? So these long-term monitoring programs are extremely important to determine this. And models have been written about this. And so this data can be put into models once we get more data to see if there's an effect. Next slide. So silver carp monitoring, next slide. So on the left, of course, is an adult silver carp, and on the right, they're fish larvae. These fish larvae came from the Ohio River right outside of our Shawnee fossil plant. We actually had to go out there and monitor how much ichthyoplankton is passing the plant and how much is being pulled in the plant. And 98% of the sample was Asian carp. So that's how bad it is on the Ohio River. So the Ohio River, these fish are actually spawning, are successful. The eggs actually hatch into larvae. And that's why it's such a threat. And that's why we're looking at barriers at Barkley and Kentucky to keep these fish from coming into our system. Next slide. So I talked about our ecological health program. And so this is the Tennessee Valley that you see right here. And the red dots are our fixed locations that we sample every year since 1993. So we alternate every 2 years, I should say, since 1993. So we have a long-term database and we're spread throughout the system so we can actually see changes in the fishery. Next slide. And this is the the next slide is the equation that we use to determine reservoir ecological health. And so we use a lot of attributes, not only the fish assemblage and the benthic macroinvertebrate assemblage, which are bugs. We look at sediment quality, chlorophyll, and dissolved oxygen. Next slide. Sorry, I'm going through this real fast, but I have a doctor's appointment in Oak Ridge real soon. Strategies to stop the upstream migration, like I said, a recap, communication. We have to communicate with the public and other state and federal partners to make sure we're sharing information. Everybody has the most up-to-date information. We need to look at barriers, all types of barriers. Are they effective? What type would be effective? And that's why the USGS and all the other state and federal partners, we're working together to make sure if we do decide to put a barrier in, will it work, and what combination of barriers we might need to use. And so we're working on that now, and soon we're going to have meetings with the USGS and the states and other federal partners to discuss the areas that we have, where are the best places to put barriers, so we can provide that information into our programmatic environmental assessment. We got to use commercial fishing. They're a big tool of getting these carp out of our system. So if the carp do get into our reservoirs, we can, number one, find out where they're congregating, find the pinch points, and get these commercial fishermen here and get these fish out of the system. Contract fishing does the same thing. In areas where the fish aren't there yet, the states are contracting fishermen to go out there to fish for them to get that early notification. Bow fishing tournaments, very good way of getting these carp out of the system. Typically these tournaments are at night and people are shooting these fish and they're having a big roundup. And of course the large scale netting at pinch points, very important. And that modified and unified method that the USGS tested out is very effective. And like I said, the state of Kentucky's going to try to sample 10 different coves this year on the 2 reservoirs that they manage to remove Asian carp. Next slide. So let's talk about communication. Now, all the federal and state partners have websites. We're trying to get as much information out as we can about this subject because there's a lot of misnomers out there. And so we've been giving TV interviews. The picture on the left, that's when last year on Kentucky Lake, when we were actually netting these fish and tagging them with radio transmitters, I took out the Tennessee Uncharted film crew and had them interview this young lady. Her first name is Jessica, from the state of Kentucky, about the program and what the purpose was, and to get this, number one, out to the public. This is what we're doing, because a lot of people want to know what's going on, who's doing what. And so public meetings, I know my state and other federal partners, we go to as many public meetings as we can to spread this information. This is what we do know, and this is what we don't know. And of course, sporting events, we have biologists that go with our 700-gallon aquarium to a lot of different events, like the Bassmaster Classic recently in Birmingham, Alabama. And we're there to answer questions. And we answer questions throughout the valley, especially invasive species. So number one, communication, that is a big push right now. And we're trying to coordinate with all our state and federal partners to get all the talking points out there. Next slide. So barriers, like I said, we're looking at all 10 of our lock and dams, which is very important because we need to get ahead of this. So we're looking at all different types of barriers. There's electric, acoustic, there's compressed gas, there's CO2, you name it, there's barriers out there. We're going to evaluate all of them to see which ones actually can be used and are effective. There's no sense in spending millions of dollars on something that doesn't work. So the acoustic barrier system at Barkley Lock is a test right now of what we're actually testing, and they call it the BAF, the bioacoustic fish fence. Well, this is a sound barrier that's installed by the USGS. Okay, they actually installed it last fall, but this year they're starting to test it. High water is preventing some issues. Plus, they're finding out some of the equipment's very vulnerable to flood damage, and so they're working out their kinks. But this number one, this barrier will verify if it works. And what we've done is we've tagged fish both upstream and downstream of this dam, and we're tracking fish throughout this dam. So and with this barrier system. So what they do is they'll test 1 week with it on, and then they'll turn it off for a week and they'll do a test to see if it changes any movement patterns of these fish. So the successful spawning, like I said earlier, has only occurred in 2015 because of our high head dams. And all this recruitment that we're getting into our systems is coming from the Ohio River. So it's very important that we stop these fish from coming up the river. So the state of Kentucky, they're removing fish below that dam. So that's a tool in our toolbox to reduce the pressure so they don't keep moving through the dam. And it is a pinch point. So that's a good thing. But if we can get barriers that work, and if we can put them at Kentucky and Berkeley, we can stop the recruitment coming from the Ohio River, which is very important because apparently they're not reproducing, if at all, in the Tennessee and Cumberland system, which is good. Because if we can stop the upstream migration from the Ohio, these other fish could die of old age. And they do live a long time, but then we can use all our other tools to get them out of the system. So these barriers don't have to be 100% effective to reduce this population. Few are going to get by, but the other tools, like I said, we have in our toolbox, we can get these fish out of the system. So the first and foremost thing we need to do is reduce the recruitment from the Ohio River to keep our upstream water safe. Next slide. So commercial fishermen, extremely valuable because they remove several tons of fish per year. Likewise with bow fishing of Asian carp, that removes a lot of Asian carp out of the system every year. So, and these are just tools of trying to get these fish out. Next slide. And all these pictures are not the Tennessee River system. These pictures are from the Ohio and other tributaries to the Ohio. So these jumping carp, we haven't seen them in the Tennessee system like this. So, I mean, don't get too far excited about all these jumping fish because I haven't seen it even on Kentucky when I've been out there helping the states. So the Asian carp roundup's extremely important. And so what we have is several bow fishing, netting, fishing, you name it, and multiple agencies get together and try to remove all these fish at one time. These fish are being thrown in on ice and taken for processing. Next slide. So we've cooperated, like I said, with the states. We're trying to get as many fish tagged as we can to use them as Judas fish so we can find out where they're going so we can, number one, get the commercial fishermen and get them out of the system. Next slide. So the uses of Asian carp. Table fare is a good use for it. And a lot of people say, well, why do we want to promote eating these things? Well, look, we're trying to keep them out of the Tennessee and Cumberland River systems. And we can be successful doing that. These fish are still in the Ohio. They're still in the Mississippi and they're still in the Missouri, rivers and whatnot. So if we can get this market and encourage this market, it will reduce the pressures in those systems so we don't get any accidental transfer into our system. So that's very, very important. Plus, they can be used as bait, animal feed, compost, and recreation. Next slide. So they are great table fare. They have a fine white flesh, and they're very good. They almost taste like as good as crappie, believe it or not. Next slide. And they are a delicacy. So the Kentucky Fish Center, which they call affectionately the Kentucky Fish House, is a public-private partnership that the state of Kentucky helped fund. Their harvest goal by 2024 is 20 million pounds. And their production goal, they are going to reach that, believe it or not. And this, the center also teaches commercial fishermen how to fish for these things, because these Asian carp are pretty smart. They don't succumb to regular gill nets. You have to use certain sizes and certain techniques and certain ways you set these things to catch them, because the fish will go around, they'll go over, and they'll avoid nets. And of course, the state of Kentucky bought a commercial ice machine, and that helps promote keeping these fish on ice so they don't spoil, so we can get them to market, so they can get them sold. Because if the commercial fishermen can get paid more for their catch, they're going to fish more, and we'll get more carp out of this system. So that's why it's important that we promote eating these fish, because that way these commercial fishermen will keep fishing for them. And because if they're not making money, they're not going to do it. Next slide. So how do we turn the invasive species problem into a bait solution? Well, we've already, the states have already been approached by different people using bait for lobsters and crabs on the Maine coast and on the Alaskan coast. So, but they want these fish alive, and when there's no way we can ship over state lines because of the Lacey Act of live invasive species like this. But if we can have another market for these fish and use them for bait, and they're paying, I believe it was 50 cents per pound a few months ago. So this is a good avenue. So when the fish processors are overwhelmed with too many fish, they can be sold for bait, which is good. And that way we can keep these fishermen fishing. Next slide. And like I said, the Lacey Act, basically it's illegal to transport invasive species across state lines, and the fish have to be dead and eviscerated. In other words, the gill arch has to be cut or something like that. That way they cannot survive. Next slide. So silver carp on the Ohio River, it's a big problem. The state of Kentucky's and other surrounding states are trying to manage that, and they're trying to keep an eye on it, but they can't keep these fish from reproducing because of the low head dams. Next slide. Health and safety are big issues. So people can get hurt because these fish are very large. They have a hard head, and they have been known to put people in the hospital. Next slide. So they are hazard to boaters, and they will fly in your boat and whatever, especially when they're very, I guess their population is dense in that area. So if they're congregating flying, that's not a good place to recreate. Like I said, all those pictures are from the Ohio and other tributaries to the Ohio, not the Tennessee Valley. So the state of the valley, and this is just a recap of what I just said, you know, all these federal and state agencies are working together through MICRA to share information so we can get all these tools in our toolbox to reduce the numbers of these fish and get them out of our lakes. Next slide. So we need to establish the leading edge. And so with these 400 plus fish that we've tagged, we do know that they're in Pickwick Reservoir, and the majority of the Asian carp are in Pickwick Reservoir. And this last meeting that I attended through WebEx, most of these fish, half of them, 50% of the fish move from Pickwick downstream into Kentucky because of the high water, they believe. So that's good news, because that reduces the pressure of the leading edge. That's fewer fish that can migrate upstream. So that's good news. Next slide. So we're testing acoustic barriers and sound and light at Barkley Dam, which is good news, because if we can find out that if this is effective, we can use them in other locations. Next slide. We've for course, the state of Kentucky developed the fish house. They purchased ice machine to get these fish out. This fish house, they actually flash freeze these fish, and they have a big market in Europe where they'll send a lot of these things to Europe because they are a delicacy, very good fish to eat. I've eaten them at the Tennessee Aquarium, and where they've served them up with special chefs, which was interesting. Next slide. So contract and commercial fishermen programs sponsored by the state, extremely important because this is one of the biggest tools we use to get them out of our system. We can make it profitable for these commercial fishermen. We can get more out there and get these fish out of our system. Can't say that more enough. We need our commercial fishermen. Next slide. And any comments?
We did
I
have
only
one
have
question that
about a
came
minute.
through. I know you have negative time, but the only question that we have so far that has come through about the carp is somebody asked if you don't find them when you were talking about the fish that was reported at Chickamauga, will you still continue mitigation efforts?
Yes. Yeah, we're still looking. The state's very engaged. I work with the invasive species coordinator, Cole Hardy, with TWRA. Often he actually loaned me special nets used to catch these Asian carp during when we're trying to confirm, our side scanning sonar sightings. So we've only found native fish, by the way. So yes, we're going to continue our efforts. The TWRA is going to continue their efforts, and we're going to keep working together on a lot of our spring surveys, still looking for these fish. So thank you very much. I appreciate
Thank
the
you. And I know
opportunity to
you
spread
have,
this.
and I know you have to
Carla
leave.
Bruce has got a
Thank
question.
you so much for joining us today.
I have a question.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
We've got a question.
Too late.
Is he gone?
Are you there?
Yeah, he's gone, and I apologize. He had a doctor's appointment, and
Well, here, you can ask this question when you talk to
1:30.
him
He
again.
wasn't thinking about being last on the agenda, so that was my fault. I should have probably.
Well, you can pass this question on to him, Carla. Bruce, go ahead.
Well, she's got to stop talking first.
Yeah, Bruce, go ahead with your question, and Carla can pass it on.
Carla, I want you to pass this question on to him, or give me his number and I'll talk to him. Here's the question I have, is that having grown up in North Alabama in the Mountain Lakes area, which is also part in Tennessee, I noticed casual observation that the spread seems to stop when the Tennessee River starts rising in altitude from Pickwick on up to here. No fish in the higher altitudes. All the fish seem to be in the Mississippi Delta areas, and what I'd like to know is, have they done any studies to show the effect of altitude on the spread of the silver carp? First question. Number two is that how long did it take from the time they discovered the fish in the upper Mississippi, which is basically flat, no altitude, how long did it take for them to go and get into the Ohio and down into Tennessee River down to Pickwick? And it seems to have slowed their progress once they started in altitude going up into the mountains. So is there an effect of altitude on the spread of fish? If not, does it slow it down?
I will pass those questions on to him. I know that the explanation that he's given us is more the types of locks and dams that are on the various rivers, and our high head dams on the Tennessee River are what keep them from successfully spawning, at least from those eggs becoming viable larvae. So I will pose these questions to him, and if anybody else who is watching the live stream or any other board members have any questions for him, if you can submit them to us, you can send them directly to me if you want to. My email address is on the website under the board members. I'm also in the Teleco Village directory, and I will be happy to pass those on to Mr. Baxter, and he has offered to answer all of those questions for us, and we can post them on the POA website. If you send me a question, I will also send it back to you via email. So yeah, Bruce, any of those types of questions.
One last question for you.
And it's just, it's unfortunate he wasn't available to stay for more questions and answers, but he has offered to come back if we want him to, if people have questions and want to do that.
One last question for you to ask him. I didn't notice it on his map, and I've noticed on others. What is the spread of the fish up the Ohio River? As the Ohio River goes up to points east, like toward Pittsburgh, not Pittsburgh, but on up into like Ashland, Kentucky, and on up in there. As it starts going up toward the mountains too, What's the impact of the spread of the fish?
Okay. I'll pass those questions on to him. I just have a couple of other items to talk about. If nobody else in the room, I see you, Bruce. What's up? Is that it? Okay. So just a couple of other updates for Tellico Village residents. And that is, what can you do to help? Because as Rick said in his opening statement about this subject, we haven't forgotten about it, even though COVID-19 seems to have taken over all of the headlines. One important thing that you can do is go to the TWRA website, and all of this information is going to be provided so that it can be in the Telegram POA update from this meeting. So you'll be able to link to these websites. So the website is tnwf.org/Asian carp. And there's a pledge there. When you take that pledge, you're pledging to take 4 steps to help stop Asian carp migration. And there you can also sign up to receive the latest conservation news and actions to take. The first step is what we've been talking about all along ever since the Asian Carp Committee was formed, and that is talk to your legislators and keep talking to them. There is a link on this website to send email messages to Tennessee legislators. The second thing is do not move bait fish. Dennis talked about that. He showed the picture on the green lid, and I have that picture that will be posted with the board update, and I'll send that to Beth as well. And it shows you the difference between the shad and the Asian carp for using for bait fish. So we want to make sure if for some reason that you net an Asian carp, that you are doing the third step, which is reporting that to TWRA. And there's information on how to report that to TWRA on the website, and will be included in the board update, as well as a very important thing to do is to visit the Facebook page of Stop Silver Carp in TN, or in Tennessee. And there you can stay up to date on legislation, action, and how you can help the effort. And those photos are also on the Facebook page of how to recognize the silver carp as opposed to a shad bait fish, and also how to report that if you find one. So all of that information can be found in this board update that I'll send to Beth, and she can include in the upcoming telegram. And that's all I have about Asian carp today.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Carla? Do we have anything from outside? Yeah, we've got a question coming in from outside.
All right. Wayne Enderley would like to know how long-range plan impacts to Tellico Village based on the pandemic being considered versus short-term impacts and the desires of residents. And do we have any examples?
That when we get to the other, we'll deal with that.
Oh, that's what I
question.
thought you meant. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking for questions from outside about the Asian carp presentation.
Nope.
We've got none. Okay, great. So that brings us to the last agenda item, which is other. Are there any other topics from board members? Steve.
Just want to get this on the list for our next meeting, Rick. And they deal with getting an update on our preferred builder program, how that works, what's the contract language, performance metrics, etc. The other one is I'd like to get updated on the ACC and the POA, how they are either involved, accountable, or neither with respect to drainage issues. There's been a lot of things on next door the last week or so. I'd just like to get the board updated on those 2 specific items.
Well, actually, I can give you an update on one of those right now. If you read yesterday's telegram, you would notice in there that there is no preferred builder program anymore, because that's not what we're calling it. We're calling it the Builders Guild. And the reason it was changed is we did not want to give the impression to anybody that we are preferring or recommending any particular builder. Does that answer your question?
I did, and what I would like to have is an update from Beth on the guild and performance of the builders in the guild, how we track it.
Fine.
we'll put that on the agenda for the next meeting.
And your second item,
Oh, that was the drainage. Get updated on drainage.
I understand that.
What's the
and frankly,
POA responsibility,
gonna-
et cetera, ACC?
I'm going to ask Kevin to actually address that right here and now. From a legal standpoint, drainage on private property is not the POA's responsibility. And in fact, if we spend money on people's private property, we're violating the CNRs. But I will let Kevin talk about the ACC process and drainage.
Well, that's certainly a fair introductory statement. Obviously, we are limited by our CNRs in what we can and can't do. We've had a long-standing policy based upon our CNRs to not work on any private property. However, and those are situations where you have an already completed property that may be experiencing drainage. Now, to the extent that any drainage issues are in any way caused or contributed by conditions on the common area or alterations by the POA, we will address them within our common areas to the extent that they can be. However, from a general standpoint, the POA is not responsible for the natural conditions of the land in the vicinity or for the original underlying infrastructure associated with the water system that was put in by the developer. Now, during the permitting process, the ACC does its best to be sensitive to drainage issues that could arise. And not only does that address during the permitting process, but it's also addressed during the inspection process from the ACC. However, a lot of drainage problems typically arise on private properties after the homes are completed. That can be based upon changes from the builder after, or landscaper more commonly, after a home is permitted and completed, or changes that private property owners put in place after a property is completed and inspected and improved. So, all drainage situations are unique, and the ACC is very sensitive to drainage issues and tries to address them with respect to each and every permit application. But the problem oftentimes occurs after a home has been permitted and approved and constructed, that certain drainage issues may arise given what actions landscapers take, how property owners maintain their properties, how things are addressed with gutter drains and other landscaping and irrigation. So it's a complicated process, but the ACC and the POA staff try to be as mindful as possible.
Steve, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question. I'm wondering if we need to get some kind of communication out to all property owners to see if we can get more clarity and understanding as to what Kevin just said.
We can certainly devise communication, but I would tell you that in almost every individual case, the circumstances are somewhat different. But we can do that, no problem.
The fact that drainage issues are not the POA's responsibility to fix after the fact if it's on private property, just to go out there one more time and let the facts be as they are.
Got it. Okay. Any other items from board members? That being said, what do we have coming in from the outside world?
All right, there are a lot of drainage questions, so I think the communication is going to be important from different areas and what we're going to do about that. Back to Wayne Enderle's question, he asked, when we get ready to do the reopening, how have the long-range impacts for Tellico Village based on the pandemic been considered versus short-term impacts and desires of residents, and do we have any examples?
Not sure what that question means.
I would say mostly we've been looking at short-term impacts, not necessarily long-term at this point.
Right now, what we're doing is we're addressing what we are required to do by government edict, and now we're going to start to change direction and start to address what we need to do to come through and start to reopen the village. Beyond that, I believe that our focus right now is to get the village back open to whatever extent we can do that safely. So, and by the way, I've had this conversation privately with Wayne.
All right, another question from Wayne. Has anything been done to get COVID testing available in the village from Summit Medical? I know there's a lot of testing sites close by, but.
Yeah, Summit Medical addressed that issue, right up front. They are not approved to be a testing site yet. They're still trying to get approved. So the answer to the question is there won't be testing in the village in the foreseeable future.
Some of the other comments are asking about committee meetings. I know some of us have moved to Zoom and just a better way to communicate those. So we have a managers meeting Friday, and we'll be discussing that. And I'll get back to everybody via Telegram on how we're going to proceed in the future. Let me see. Some new questions. Can commercial fishing control the amount of carp in Kentucky Lake? Carl, I guess you're seeing these comments. You can address those in the next gram. And that's it.
Carla, did you get that question?
Is it my turn?
Oops.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question from a property owner, Tom McPhee, and he has a quote on curtains and heaters for the Mountain View patio at the Kahiti Community Center.
That hasn't come to the board yet. And it will not be scheduled until a later meeting because of other priorities right now.
Okay, so the answer to the question that we didn't hear is that, well, that's going to be.
Yeah, it'll be on a board meeting sometime probably next month. But it really is contingent on what else we have going on. We have a lot of critical issues right now.
One more from Norris Shake. He says, are we coordinating our reopening efforts with Buddy Bradshaw?
We haven't got any.
I'll give that one to Pat. Since he's a lifelong buddy and pal of Buddy.
No, well, yeah, we're coordinating with the federal, the state, and the county, and all the local governments. And our conversations here are do we go to some of those limits that they're wanting to go through, open everything, or as we keep being pointed out and having pointed out to us, we are in one of that most extreme at-risk categories, and we fall into love to meet and hang around with each other and really miss the social part. And it's going to boil down to if the federal government, state government, and Buddy Bradshaw says go for it, I've still got to make a personal decision with Alice and I. Am I willing to do this without watching the numbers change? So,
yeah, and I just add to that. You hit the nail on the head. We're different. We have a very high level of at-risk population. So, as a board, we have to be prudent. We probably need to be somewhat conservative. And we need to make sure that people understand as we open things up that they have a personal responsibility to protect not only themselves but their neighbors.
yeah, and I think we need to understand, because I would love to have somebody tell me what to do. I truly would. If they said, Pat, you can now go play golf and you could get back to hugging the folks at church again, that would be swell. But I've got to do what I think I need to do. And if I don't want to play pickleball, if the pickleball court's open, then I shouldn't play pickleball. And if I don't want to go to the restaurants, or I don't want to have dinner with Bruce and Brenda, even though neither one are infected and the law and Buddy Bradshaw says I can, well, it's still my choice. And if I don't feel comfortable, I shouldn't feel bad about not being comfortable getting back into the social aspect of this yet. I just want everybody to understand it. Simply because Rick and Pat White and the board says you can play pickleball again, you don't have to.
Yeah, that's right. People have to make that decision for themselves. But we also have a responsibility to act prudently. So, any other questions coming from outside? Okay.
I move.
That completes the agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move.
We're adjourned.